Xbox Series S is a cheapest next-generation console available on the market that is designed to achieve the compromised performance and image quality with next-gen features for a reasonable price. In this tech analysis, we will find out how Xbox Series S is achieving its goals in games, both from technical and user experience perspective. Hello, and welcome back to Hardware Lab. The worst disadvantages of using a previous gen consoles are unacceptable level of noise and awful performance, even in the day one games. In 2016, the problems of their hardware structure were very obvious. Remember 900p in Assassin's Creed Unity, or crazy drops below 30 and even 20 in Sniper Elite 4, or 720p on the Xbox side in Battlefield 4. Even the GTA 5 multiplayer in 30 frames per second is unachievable on those machines. This is strongly connected to outdated CPU side of both Xbox One and PS4 machines. Legend tells that there is nothing as smart as combing two athlons together and selling that crap as a gaming monster. Yeah, the weakest part of a previous gen consoles is a CPU. Cores of Jaguar are as slow as possible, even lower than the Office PC's stuff, due to the low frequency. We will talk about that a bit later, and now let's compare that trash with an 8-cores Zen 2 chip used in Xbox Series S. It has two modes, 3.6 GHz without disabled SMT, and 3.4 with enabled. Depends on developer's choice. 8 MB of L3 cache is still lower than on a PC Ryzen chips, but it's acceptable. Especially the strong CPU side is what lets next-gen consoles achieve a high frequency rate mode and run some games at a 120 frames per second. Of course, the CPU limitation in this gen is not that strong, and some projects like Cyberpunk 2077 and Matrix Awakens shows its power, drawing incredibly complex geometry. But there is no profit from a top-tier CPU platform if the GPU side is something closer to low-end PC card. Again, previous gen PS4 was using something that completely could not compete to Radeon 7950, and cannot strongly win even in the battle with 7850. Even jokes about that price of crap got outdated later than it itself. The current situation is a lot better at first glance, but if we'll try to count it, will be obvious that PS5's GPU is lower in comparison to top-tier RX 6900 XT than PS4 in comparison to top-tier 7970 back in the days. In some point it's true, but 7970 had been released almost 2 years back before PS4, and the price was a lot cheaper. What about Series S? It has a unique market niche of a budget console, and, respecting to the price, it doesn't lose the face, offering the gamer a truly competitive low-end RDNA 2 GPU, while all the PC's RDNA 2 budget cards are awful. Actually, GPU on Series S is not a complete RDNA 2, in case of lack of L3 cache, but all the rest of the features are here, in contrast to PS5. 20 CUs with the average frequency of 1560 MHz, 32 ROPs, and 80 texture engines. Sounds alright as for a device that costs $300. But marketing is doing its job, and Microsoft have promised that this thing will run games with the same settings as Series X, but in Quad HD instead of 4K. But we all understand that there is no uncompromising 4K on Series X, and going ahead, there is no even uncompromising Full HD on Series S. Don't take serious all that the marketing department says. Lying is their nature, but does that lie make the device bad itself? I don't think so. Moreover, Xbox has some tricks up its sleeve. Let's talk about the full set of RDNA 2 technologies and what they stand for. One of the main next-gen features that Xbox supports is a sampler feedback technology complex that includes two parts: sampler feedback streaming and texture-based shading. Sampler feedback streaming stands on proper reading of MIP textures. Generally speaking, MIP textures contain duplicate textures with a different resolution. Each MIP is the previous divided by 2. For example, for 512 by 512 MIP, the texture will also contain 256 by 256, 128 by 128, etc. In traditional rendering system, the whole texture must be loaded in VRAM to change the between MIP levels very fast. That is, of course, not suitable for the limited buffers and high-res textures as 8192 by 8192. Xbox can switch the MIP levels by loading them on the fly directly from a high-speed SSD. Moreover, MIP level detection system that allows the engine to choose MIP is changed as well, and now it works not according to the ray-casted distance from a camera, but according to the screen sampling that allows the engine to figure out what exactly part of the MIP should be used and uploaded. These pots are named as tiles and all of them have IDs. It requires the engine to support the tiling rendering. All in all, sampler feedback streaming allows to reduce the VRAM consumption up to ×3 in comparison to typical system and make the transitions between MIPs a lot smoother. Texture space shading, however, can be an alternative of traditional, differed and forward rendering, because it allows to count the lightening of an object by counting light for each used tile of a texture. Going forward, there is a support of mesh shaders technology that can provide a fantastic boost to this device. You can try to look at that stuff by running Matrix Awakens PC demo or trying a 3D Mark benchmark that shows up to 1000 frames using that on PC top tier cards. The primitive and mesh shaders advantage is really huge. Speaking about RAM system, Xbox Series S has 2 buffers of RAM that are both divided between CPU and GPU sides. Their sizes are 8 and 2 GB, which is a really small amount, and can be a further limitations for this device. But only the time will show how significant this disadvantage is. However, from the RAM side, Xbox destroys the low-end RDNA 2 GPUs, as can be clearly seen from one of our previous videos. Since we touched the topic of memory subsystem, we should fully understand the way how does storage work here. The SSD size is 512 GB, which is fairly enough, and the bandwidth of 2.4 GB per second. However, modern compression hardware accelerated techniques can even double this amount. Insane speed, right? But this is a nature of next-gen system and of the feature that makes insanely detailed worlds like Forza Horizon 5 run at 200 miles per hour with a stable frame rate. In fact, we already saw a lot of SSD usage, fancy stuff, on both Xbox and PlayStation machines, with unbelievable loading times and previously impossible game design decisions. But Xbox goes further here, allowing some smart game-breaking stuff that is impossible even on a PC platform. Of course, I am speaking about Quick Resume feature. It allows to run easily from a pause menu without actual loading screen, one of the recently played games even when the console was taken off from a power socket, and switch between these remembered games. When any game is launched on Xbox, previous game is being copied to the swap file on SSD, leaving some space in RAM buffer for the new game, and can be easily taken back from that file. The swap file amount is, as you can guess, not unlimited, so if the first remembered game doesn't find empty space there, it will be turned off and deleted from that buffer. Another part of a next-gen Xbox machine's memory subsystem is direct storage, that is also included in DirectX 12 on PC. Using direct storage, developers use the partitioning of data array into structured elements with common factors that increase their loading speed, which is way more rational than a typical loading systems. All that techniques are the part Microsoft's high-level Xbox Velocity architecture that can be easily used by developers by a standard functionality of DirectX 12 Ultimate API that is used on Xbox consoles as well as on a PC high-end machines, making game development for the platform easier. Technical advantages on the platform are combined with some untypical for their console level of freedom to form a perfect user experience. Starting with advanced machine of a previous gen, the Xbox One X, game developers were able to provide a graphic mode option which was developed on this gen as well. The fact that the console allows user to choose from at least some options based on his personal preferences is something to be appreciated too. But I wish there were more options, modes, and that kind of stuff. Moreover, freedom with Xbox doesn't stop here, and allows you to use different input device. That's not a popular thing to discuss, but it works well with mouse and keyboard and simulative controllers. This traditional console limitation is really an idiotic stuff in the concept itself, and feels great that it is left in the past. Choosing of the way how can you use your hardware is a very important thing, at least because you've paid for it. The other aspect of freedom is, of course, a backwards compatibility. An Xbox can run most of the previous gen's games from even the Xbox original, and of course, Xbox 360. The performance boost that is allowed for that games is a nice touch as well, and it doesn't even require any patch from the developer. By some tricks with rendering API, Microsoft is boosting the frame rate of that games while they keep thinking they work at a lower FPS. Finally, we can run Assassin's Creed Syndicate at 60 on a console. Of course, this may feel as some resemblance with PC, but I don't think it is something wrong, since when did it become something elitist to be limited with your own hardware that you paid for? Maybe some Sony fans will explain that in comment section, because I see no point. By the way, let's check some actual examples of the games itself. What do they feature and how they run? Elden Ring at quality mode runs with a fairly stable 30 FPS, without an FPS cap, using fixed 2560 by 1440, but with some drops below. Performance mode, however, has a 60 FPS target, while the frame rate counting is still often below that. The compromise here is a dynamic resolution buffer with a Quad HD target and 1080p average resolution. Halo Infinite also has a mode choosing option. 30 mode runs with no visible FPS drops and at a fixed 1080p resolution, with very similar settings to the more powerful Xbox Series X, while their 60 FPS mode, again being pretty stable, shows some drops even to 960p, with temporal reconstruction. Watch Dogs Legion has an RT implementation, so all the reflections in quality mode are done by ray tracing. It works at 30 FPS and dynamic 1080p with some resolution drops to 900p. The 60 FPS mode shares all the settings that are close to PC's high, but turns that cool RT effect to off. This game, as well as a previous one, has two modes, RT and non-RT, but both have the 60 FPS target. However, RT mode here shows some massive drops under 60 and targeting 40 on average. Resident Evil shows not only RT reflections, but the general ray tracing GI that is equal to the high option on PC. The resolution here is a checkerboarded 1440p, while the quality of this reconstruction is really good. Forza Horizon 5 has a pretty great quality mode with 30 FPS, a very stable dynamic 1440p resolution that holds at native 1440p most of the time, with some of the settings even pushed to extreme. However, the 60 FPS mode being As well, very stable, feels really bad due to turned off ambient occlusion. This is probably a game breaking thing, and you could prefer never switch to 60 FPS mode here. To sum up, Xbox Series S is a great entry-level next-gen console. Of course, it has compromises, and they can be pretty obvious in comparison to the higher-tier machines, but it supports all the next-gen features, and it's able to run most of the games in acceptable quality. By the way, that's it for now. Stay up to date with HL.